Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Making History. My name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're the Hesses. We're excited to be back. That was a fun little mouth noise you made.
I don't even know what just happened.
I almost didn't even notice. I was like, what was that?
It's like a little mouse squeak.
Squeak. Okay, great. Well, we're keeping that. I love that. Yeah, so we're back. And let's talk about our week.
Yeah, it's been a really fun, full week.
It has been full and fun.
Yeah,
I agree.
with church and
Yep.
soccer and school and all the things. I know we've already mentioned those things, but just continuing to fall back into that routine.
Yep.
I think it's taken a little bit more for me to get back into school and like remembering, oh yeah, we have to.
Right.
I homeschool.
We're the
I'm a
teachers.
teacher.
Yeah, right.
And it's so much fun. But I think just adding a third kid to the mix has been like, oh, there's so many more steps that I have to take in order to get to having school.
Right.
So it's been fun.
Yeah.
And an adventure.
Yeah. But she's doing great.
She is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thankfully,
Nora loves it.
she does. She really enjoys learning.
Yeah. Yeah. And Izzy keeps asking me, like, where's my book? Where's my book? So I keep meaning to go to the store and get her like a little preschool book. But eventually that'll happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on Saturday, we had soccer again.
Yep.
And Nora scored her first goal.
She did. It was so exciting.
So fun.
She was so happy.
Yep.
Her little face when she does something good on the field is like one of my favorite things ever, because she'll look back at us and be like,
she'll immediately turn and look for us. And it's so sweet.
So sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was so funny because she tried to like almost like discount it being a real goal.
Mm-hmm.
And because she came up and she was like, well, it wasn't like a real goal. I was like, well, what do you mean it wasn't a real goal? She's like, well, I was just right there. The ball was right in front of the goal. I was like, well, it's still a goal.
That's how you score.
It was so funny just seeing her little thought process of like, well, it didn't really count.
Yeah.
Like it for sure counts. And also I've discovered that I am like a full on like screaming soccer mom.
You get pretty involved in the games.
Get pretty excited.
Yeah.
Didn't know that was in there, but it is.
Right.
And I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
I'm not like annoying. Well, I might be annoying to some people.
Well, you're tame compared to some of the other parents.
That is true. Yeah. I like think that I'm still at a place where I'm able to like hold myself back when I know, but I just get really excited when Nora does anything on the field. Just proud.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So that was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And this past Sunday, our church had our first service in a brand new building.
We did.
We just moved into, and it was
so good.
It was just unbelievable. Yeah. It was so fun.
It really was amazing. Just like you could feel the excitement with everybody who walked in. And I didn't see many people like enter the building, but I heard somebody say yesterday at our staff meeting that like everybody's face was like, whoa, like walking into the new building, like, this is awesome.
Yeah, because most people have not been in there, maybe seen a couple of pictures, but probably not even since it's been more finished.
Yeah,
so,
and it's hard to tell when you're like mid-construction how beautiful something is going to be, because it's like, this just looks like beams and insulation.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's beautiful.
It is, yeah. And for those of you who don't know, we are both on staff at our church, Be Love Company. Mm-hmm. So you can look it up, find us on social media.
Come visit.
If you're even if you're not, I was going to say if you're in the area, even if you're not in the area, come visit.
Come on.
We are just in love with our church, and we are just so happy and so proud to be a part of it. And it's just been so fun.
Right. It really is a special place.
Yeah.
And I don't say that lightly. You know, it sounds so like, you know, whatever, like, oh, sure, it's so special because it's yours. But it's not just the people who are on staff saying that, that like, it really is like the Lord is doing something really cool at Be Love Company and other places too, but we just are so aware of it here because we're living in it. Yeah. And so we're really excited to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So that was fun. And yeah, it's been a good week.
Yeah.
Overall.
We had a fun night last night, the girls and I.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead and talk about
Real
that.
quick. A couple times, Nora and I have done this in the past where we take our living room couches and we push them together to form like a mega couch bed. And it's super fun. And we have a little sleepover on there. And so last night, Izzy got to do that for the first time. And when I told her the idea, I was like, hey, what would you think if you and me and Nora all slept together on the couches and like watched a movie and went to sleep and all slept out there together? And she was like, what? We can do that? It was like the most genuine, like, I didn't even think about this.
We can
like,
sleep
what?
in the living room.
She was like blown away by even just the thought of it. And so we did it. And I was a little hesitant just because Izzy can be a little wild at bedtime. So I was like, I don't know how this is going to go, but she did great. And they both fell asleep super fast, honestly, faster than they normally do in their beds. So I was like, well, maybe, if we're having a hard time getting them to go to sleep, let's just do couch bed.
Throw them on the couch.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had that, had a fun girl sleepover last night. They've been begging to do that or Nora has been begging to do that for forever. And so I was glad that we were able to finally make it happen, because usually the request comes at like when they're getting in their beds.
Right.
Like, can we have a sleepover? I'm like, well, no, not now. Like, you're already in your bed.
Yeah.
So it was good to actually execute the plan.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. They loved it.
Yep. It was fun.
Okay. Let's keep talking about boundaries.
Yeah.
We can do maybe a little bit of a recap, and ultimately we're going to this will just be a continuation, I think, of last week's conversation.
Yeah.
But there are a couple things about boundaries that I think is worth mentioning. And some of this I kind of maybe said a little bit last week, but I think there's some room to expound ideas and further elaborate. But one of the interesting things about boundaries is that it's like the purpose of us talking about this is not that we would help people establish boundaries in their life, as much as it is about helping people identify the boundaries that they have already set up in their life.
Sure. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, if the reason boundaries exist is to protect that which we value, and if the way we protect what we value is by saying yes to that thing, then no matter who you are, you have boundaries.
Right.
Because
whether you have know it or not.
Whether you know it or not, you have boundaries. And you have boundaries because you have values. And you have values because there are things in your life that you say yes to. As you can follow that trail of thought.
Sure.
And say, okay, you have boundaries. We're not trying to help you establish boundaries. We're trying to help you identify the ones that you've already set up.
Yeah.
And reassess. Are the values that I've set up in my life the values that I want to have?
Right. Are these the values that I say that I have? Are my boundaries actually lining up and upholding those values that I'm speaking about? Or is my life actually showing that I value completely different things?
Right.
Because my boundaries are set in place to protect something that I don't actually know that I'm protecting.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly it. And I know last week we talked about the difference between desires and values. Because I think a lot of times our language reflects our desires, but our time, our energy, and our money reflects our values.
Right.
And those are not always the same thing. And we talked about how that is the difference between a desire and a value. A value is something that you're willing to have cost you something.
Yeah.
And if you're not willing to have it cost you something, it's not a value. At best, it's a desire. And our boundaries don't exist to protect our desires. They exist to protect our values.
Right. Yeah.
And the example I used last week with that is, I'd love to be really genuinely, I would love to be a great guitar player. I would love to be, I grew up playing piano. I would love to be a great, keyboard player. But the reality is that desire, I don't have any boundaries protecting that in my life because I'm unwilling right now in the season to say yes to that.
Right.
I'm unwilling. And so as much as I want to be a great guitar player, I'm unwilling to let that desire cost me anything. Because in order for that desire to become a value and become a reality in my life, it'll cost me energy, it'll cost me time, and it'll cost me money.
Right. And I think like people need to know that that's okay.
Yeah.
That you don't have values for every desire
Sure.
in your life, because sure, being a great guitar player would be great. That's awesome. But it's not going to like change your relationship with the Lord.
Right.
If you're a good guitar, it's not going to change how like good of a family life we have. You know, ultimately it's not serving your like rooted values that you have. So like, it's okay to not have a value for every little thing that could potentially be a good thing in your life.
Yeah. And the reason that's true is because our resources are so limited.
Yes.
We need to be highly intentional in where we're directing them because we are only able to allocate a certain amount of resources. We don't have unlimited resources. So not everything can be of value.
We only have so much energy to be able to do so many things during the day.
Yep.
And so we don't want to run ourselves completely ragged trying to pursue all of these interests that we have. We need to have a realistic expectation for ourselves to be able to pour into those values that are actually like truly going to set up a life that we want and that is actually realistic to pursue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I have a couple thoughts. And the first is that I think, and what you said brought this to mind, that if we're going to be people who establish boundaries in our lives that are set up to protect the things that are most valuable to us, it helps to have a vision for the kind of life you want to create and to have a vision for the kind of people we want to be, the kind of marriage we want to have, the kind of kids we want to raise. What do we want our work life to look like? All of those things. If we don't have a vision for where we're going, it'll be a lot harder to establish values, and it'll be a lot harder to know what am I meant to say yes to in this season.
Absolutely. Yeah, because if you don't have like a specific goal that you're working towards, you can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you're a human, days get away from you.
Yeah.
Like there have been so many days where I'm like, oh, I'd love to get this done, and I have this thought in my mind, but I don't actually like put any like real action towards it. And so at the end of the day, I've not actually completed my goal. But if I set out a clear vision to like, okay, at this time, I'm going to do this. And at this time, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to do that. Then what do you know? At the end of the day, my goal has been completed. And so I have set myself up with a clear path to be able to achieve that goal. And it's the same thing with those visions for your family. You have to set up a clear path for yourself, and it's small steps to get there. You know, you can't just all of a sudden like, boom, this is a value set up in our household. You have to take small steps in order to build towards that value so that you're actually able to live a life that looks like what that value is.
Yeah. There is this thing, Dallas Willard is somebody that I find just amazing to listen to read. And he has this thing that he talks about. He calls it the VIM, V-I-M, VIM. And it's establishing a vision, intention, and means. And so we've already been talking about vision, but having just an idea, having a dream, having a goal of where you want to go. And you can do that in any area of your life. Like I said, family, work, your finances, whatever.
Right.
And so once you have a vision and once you have established within yourself that you fully intend to work towards that vision, at that point, it's not until you have a vision and that you have established an intention that you will even look for the means through which that vision can become a reality.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I like the practicality of what you're saying, and you and I are getting better at this and working on this because, like you said, the days get away. And so, if you have a vision for how you want your day to go, you have these certain tasks. If you have the vision for how you want it to go, and you have set yourself up with the intention that I'm going to actually do this, then you can start looking at the means, and the means of making that vision a reality looks like the practicalities of, okay, at 10 o'clock, I need to do this because at 11 o'clock, I need to be here.
Right.
And so you can kind of plan out your day. And that is the means through which your vision can become a reality.
Right. Yeah. And every decision gets run through that overarching vision and value that you have set in place.
Yeah.
And it makes it honestly just so much easier to do your life, because if you don't have a clear vision for who you want to be, what you want your family to look like, any decision is up for grabs.
Right.
Really. You could just make whatever choices and it doesn't really matter because you don't have a vision that you're working towards.
Right.
And that way I feel like it's a lot easier to get yourself into trouble, you know, not like major trouble, but just getting yourself into a place where you're like, okay, I don't even really know why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Right.
And I lived that way for a really long time. And so I know that that feeling is not great. Would not recommend because you just go through life and you're like, okay, well, I'm making this decision, but now I don't really like that I made that decision, but I don't really know why. And so you just don't even have a train of thought to trace back into why you made the decision that you did. But when you have those visions and those values set in place, you're able to say, okay, this is what I want my family life to look like. So if I say yes to this, is that going to help me further that vision?
Right.
Or is that going to diminish diminish that value in any way? Is that going to take away from that overall idea that I'm working towards? And so it makes decision making so much easier.
Yeah.
And coming from a person who's like typically had a hard time making decisions, it's very helpful to have that tool in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about too with boundaries. So we've mentioned that people have boundaries, whether they know it or not, whether they like it or not.
Yep.
And that's true because we have values and we have things that we say yes to every single day. And so if we're going to be people who establish a vision for who we want to become, and we want our values to line up with that vision so that we know what we need to say yes to in order for that vision to become a reality.
Yeah.
I think it's worth considering that we need a model. We need an example.
Yes.
If all I have to look at in the interest of discerning who I want to become, or even maybe who I'm meant to become, if all I have to look at is just the world around us, that becomes a pretty open-ended and in a sense maybe kind of a scary thing to view, because there's a lot of things that the world has normalized that we don't necessarily want to be a part of our vision, part of our lives. And so we need a model and we need an example. And for that reason, we look to Jesus. We look to him and we look to his kingdom. Yeah. Because Jesus, as we mentioned last week, he had boundaries. He even had relational circles, and that he had at times thousands of disciples. Yeah. At times hundreds. But he always had his 12 apostles. And even within his 12, he had 3, Peter, James, and John. Yeah. That they got to do more things than the other 9 did. Right. And even John would claim that he was the one. Right. You know, like he was the one, even of the 12 and of the 3, he was the beloved. I'm the guy. You know. And this is a side note, but you know, the disciples often argued about who was the greatest. And it was this common thing that just shows up again and again in the Gospels. And the disciples were always trying to prove why they were the greatest. But I heard somebody present this idea that, or really it was a question, what if the disciples were arguing over who was the greatest because Jesus treated everybody so well that they assumed, based on how he treated them, that they were the greatest? Yeah. And so rather than, they were young, they were very immature. Sure. So it very well may have been this insecure, competitive, orphan thinking. Yeah.
No, I'm the best.
Yeah, right. But is it possible that Jesus was so loving and accepting and so kind toward everybody that based off of every interaction that each individual person had with Jesus, they were only left with the assumption that I must be the greatest for how he treats me?
You're going to make me cry again.
Yeah. And so we look to him in establishing our values. We look to him to establishing the vision for who we want to become. Because you read the Gospels and you read Paul's letters, and it's very clear that the goal of our life as followers of Jesus is that we would progressively and incrementally look more and more like him for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. And how amazing would it be to be a person that like, when you leave the earth, to be like, wow, they were my best friend.
Yeah.
Like everybody said, like they were like, I was his best friend, or they loved me the most because of how well and consistently you loved. Like, what a legacy to leave.
Yeah.
Of just loving people so well that they just feel like they're the best person in the world.
Yeah.
It would be incredible.
Yeah. And I truly think that was how Jesus operated. I think that every single person he interacted with.
Yeah.
Maybe the Pharisees didn't feel that way.
Right. Sure. Yeah. Maybe
he was tough on
they
them.
were not best friends.
Yeah. Jesus wasn't into the whole religious thing.
Yeah.
But because he loved so well and he served so well, everybody around him must have assumed that they were of unbelievable value and importance.
Yeah, right.
And so, again, we look to him. When we want to ask questions like, well, what was it that Jesus valued? How did he operate? What is his kingdom like? Because he came to establish a kingdom, and that kingdom is here and now.
Right.
And it's, as N.T. Wright would say, ever since the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, that his kingdom in this world had been on a collision course. And, we have the unique and amazing opportunity to be the ones through whom his kingdom is made manifest here.
Yeah.
But what is that kingdom like?
Right.
What does Jesus value? And if we can answer those questions, that helps to establish a vision for who we want to become.
Right.
Because we want our home to be a place that reflects his kingdom, right? We want to be people who reflect the character and the nature of God as much as we can.
Yeah. And a kingdom has to be built on values of some sort. So the fact that, it's even called the kingdom of God shows you that, yes, it is established on some like hierarchy of values and something that is grounded upon, so that they know, the Lord obviously knows exactly what his values are, and he's never changing. And so, like you were saying, kind of going back to what the world, like if we based our values off of what the world values, we'd be all over the place. It'd be a roller coaster of emotions and having to reestablish values all the time. Yeah. Because there's always something new coming out that's like, this is the most important thing, or this is what we stand for now. And with the kingdom of God, you don't have to worry about that because his values are always the same. He's always trustworthy, and you can always know and expect what the kingdom is going to look like. Yeah. Because he is who he says he is.
Yeah. And I actually think next episode, we need to talk about culture, because you mentioned that kingdoms are built on values, and that's right. And I would say that the same is true about cultures. Yeah. Because the kingdom of God has a culture in that it has a way of doing things. Yep. And cultures are established on values. And so once again, what are those values? That's the question we need to be able to answer. Because if I want to know the direction my life ought to go, I have to understand the decisions he made. What were the things that he said yes to, and why? Yep. And are those things that I ought to be saying yes to? And I like that a minute ago you mentioned, or you used the phrase hierarchy of values, because that is exactly how we need to look at it. Yeah. Because the things that are of value to us and the things that are important to us, they fall in a hierarchy, in that there are always going to be things that are more valuable than others. Sure. And I don't really find that two things can hold the same value. In that oftentimes there will be two things that we value, but at times can only say yes to one of them. Sure. At a time. Yeah. And so, for example, we have a high value for the work we do at the church. And week to week, generally speaking, it looks about the same. We have a pretty good rhythm, a pretty good flow. Right. But sometimes, like in the past couple of weeks, because we were moving into a brand new building, it just required more of us. Yeah. More time, more energy. And another value we have is just to be home and to live kind of a slowed, simple life. We like to be home. We like to spend time with each other and with family. Yeah. We have a high value for having margin in our lives, that our time isn't packed as full as it can be, that we have free time. We have freedom. We have wiggle room.
Mm-hmm. We're not on the go 24/7, having to get to this thing and this thing that we said yes to and running ourselves like into the ground.
Yes. We value
We
simplicity.
don't like that. Yeah.
Yep. And we are, working towards eliminating hurry in our lives.
Right. And I think, well, I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit in saying this, but we have a value for being able to have a full yes.
Yeah.
When we commit to something.
Mm-hmm.
So we may get into that more in just a second.
Yeah. No, you're right. And that ultimately is the purpose of boundaries is learning what do I need to say no to so that I can say yes to the things that I ought to say yes to and really mean it.
Yeah. Being able to commit to things 100% and not when the day comes to the thing that you committed, you're not going into it like, ugh, I wish I wouldn't have said yes to this, which inevitably there are still going to be those times where like we just wake up more tired one day. It's like, okay, I did say yes to this. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be, joyful in my process, but it just takes a minute to get there, and that's okay because we can be tired. You're allowed to be tired.
Yep. Yeah. So, say we've got these two values. We value work and, the stuff we do for our church, and we value being at home. And, we value doing this podcast, and there are all these different things. Well, there are times when you're going to have to choose what you say yes to. And that is how the hierarchy gets ordered. Yeah. It's what are you willing, if I say yes to this thing, it'll come at the expense of this. Or if I say yes to this, it'll come at the expense of this. And it's identifying which one am I willing to let come at the expense of others. And the more things you're willing, the more easily you're willing to let something come at the expense of something else, the lower it falls in the hierarchy.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so the things that you're saying yes to at pretty much any cost, those are of the most value.
Yes. Right. Whatever you're willing to sacrifice more is going to fall lower on the ranking of your values. And there has to be something that falls lower. Yeah. And so it's not saying that you don't care about that thing less. It's just that this thing has a higher value, a higher place of value in your life. And you just have to be able to commit to it and weigh those things out. And sometimes those can be interchangeable too, every now and then, depending on seasons, like you said, with the new building. Yeah. Like we have had to prioritize and we have chosen. Yeah. I'll say it. That's a better way to say it. We have chosen to prioritize that more. Yeah. And maybe has come at the expense of a little bit of rest here and there, where instead of being home and doing the podcast on a Friday, we were at church building furniture and prepping the building. And that was a great thing and we loved it. But in reality, it did come at the expense of us having our normal, typical schedule of recording a podcast on Friday. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But we were willing to say yes to being at the church because we have such a high value for what was happening there. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And we wanted to be a part. And so we thought, we'll say yes to this and we're going to say no to recording the podcast today. And we'll find another time to squeeze that in. Right. Because this is not something that we're going to say no to. We're going to say yes to being there. Yep. So actually, I think with what I want to talk about next week too, maybe let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Sure. I think we said a lot in a shorter amount of time. I know. Yeah. So give you guys more time to process. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of different kind of, I feel like, moving parts to understanding this. And I do want to take our time. Yeah. And make sure we're articulating well and communicating well. Right. Trying not to drown you guys in information. Yeah. But also understanding that we're just going to keep this conversation going next week because in my opinion, the establishing and the cultivating of culture is one of the most important things that we do. Yeah. And in order to do that, you have to understand your values. And it works. Building culture is right on theme with values and boundaries and all of that because it all works together. You don't really get one without the other. Right. And I think it's an ongoing conversation too. Setting up and establishing values and boundaries is not a once in a lifetime conversation that you have. Yep. And so just like that, talking and dissecting all these different moving parts is an ongoing conversation as well.
Yep.
And so, yeah, just set yourselves up for success in a way of knowing that once you have this conversation with your spouse or your friends or whoever you're having this conversation with, it's going to come back up. It's going to need to come back up.
Yeah.
Or if you're just having the conversation with yourself,
yep,
keep coming back to it and assessing those values and reassessing those values. And yeah, it's really like, it becomes a really fun process too. Because at first I remember thinking, this is a lot.
Yeah.
You know, like this is hard to break down life into a list of, 3 or 4 values. I feel like it's really hard to break it down. But once you like get through that initial, this is a lot feeling, it comes so naturally, and it just becomes a normal part of your thought process throughout the day. And
yeah. And I think depending on, we'll talk about this next week too, but depending on, the place you're in, the authority you have, and the culture you're trying to build. If you're in a position of leadership, you want to build your culture on the foundation of maybe 5 to 8 values.
Sure.
Not that you don't have more than that, but you want to identify like, these are the things that we will not say no to.
Yes.
These are the things that we need to say yes to in order to do what we have set out to do. And so, and I think, it may work like that as a family too, in that I think our list, if we were to look at our whole hierarchy of values, the things we say yes to, I think that'd be a big list.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think that the success we have in establishing the culture that, and establishing a culture that matches the vision for who we want to be, what we want our home to be like, marriage and relationships and all that.
Yeah.
I think in order to do that, you need to identify a short list of the things that we are just unwilling to say no to. Like, these are the things that we will protect at all cost.
Yeah. And that gives you a clearer vision too.
Right.
When you have like a shorter list, you know those very well. It's less easy to forget things when you have a shorter list. And I feel like the more that you like expound or expand your list, the muddier the water is going to get of just like, okay, well, what are which values am I prioritizing? Which ones are going to be, the ones that you, like you said, that we're always going to say yes to.
Right.
And so the longer the list gets, the harder it gets to really prioritize those goals.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Well,
once again, that's all for this week. And if you've enjoyed this, would you do us a favor? And whether you watch on YouTube or whether you listen on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're finding this, if you have found any value in the content that we're sharing, would you do us a favor? And if it's on social media, go ahead and like it, maybe share it. If you're listening on podcast, would you do us a favor and just give us a review? That kind of stuff goes a long way. That helps a lot.
Yep. We'd appreciate it.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's it for this week. Once again, my name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're making history. We'll see you next time.